And I'm going to say hello to everyone and welcome to our Conscious Conversation, our brand new episode with our delighted guest here, Michael Rose. Michael, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And we briefly chatted just before I pressed record about some of your experience. So I was wondering if you would be interested in sharing that with the rest of the community as well.
Yeah, sure. No, I was just talking about, having fantastic teachers, really. Um, and the first teacher was Yuichi Kawada, and his father as well. And then I went to San Francisco for a little break, and I bumped into someone called Reuho Yamada, who was a Zen priest. And he was very, very interesting, completely crazy guy. And he was actually a kind of, he took a lot of drugs, but he was also a Zen priest. And he'd actually, he turned me on to Masunaga sensei. He was a student of Masunaga sensei. And then I had the good fortune to spend a year with Masunaga in Japan, in his clinic and school. Um, and which was a very strong experience. And really, from that, um, we developed. When I came back from Japan after a year in Japan, we started this Tuesday group. I think it was called the Tuesday group, and we kind of started meeting up, and I started trying to kind of convey, the information that I'd had from Masunaga Sensei and this kind of stuff. There weren't many people who were able to study with him, and he died very young. Also,
I
he
see.
died a couple of years after, I'd met him. But anyway, and I think that I was influenced a lot by some very early successes with people in doing treatments. I mean, I was not very experienced, um, but I had a friend who, my best friend really, who had ankylosing spondylitis,
I see.
and he was in basically in pain for many, many years. Maybe 15 years. He was in constant pain.
Wow.
And I thought, well, you know what you're like when you start shiatsu. You think, well, I can cure anything or anyone, I'll give me a go. And so I had a go with him, and he started kind of shaking and quivering and all kinds of releasing all kinds of tension and energy. And in the end, he was pain free for the first time in about 15 years.
Wow.
I'm not saying that it was a particularly good treatment. And I think one of the good things about shiatsu is that even if you're pretty hopeless at it, it's still very effective. You don't have to be that brilliant, you know. But yes, he was kind of he was so inspired by this experience
Hmm.
that he decided to really take control of his own ankylosing spondylitis and do lots of exercises and stuff. And he's very well actually, and he remains very well, and he's nearly as old as I am. Um, the other person that I've had a lot of success with, which I think influenced me as well, was a lady who had had both her legs amputated,
Hmm.
and she was in a very bad way. Um, and she'd started, yeah, she'd had a kind of neurological problems, and she'd had gangrene,
Hmm.
and it had started with a black spot on her finger.
I see.
And no, it had started on her legs, which had been amputated, and then she
Mhm.
had this black spot on her finger,
Mhm.
and we thought, oh no, it's starting to on her arm.
Mm-hmm.
and I gave her shiatsu regularly, um, maybe twice or three times a week,
Mm-hmm.
and the mark turned to red, and it kind of the gangrene slewed off, and she was absolutely fine actually, and that was and then and I mean she's not fine in the sense that she still had her legs amputated, but she
Mm-hmm.
was fine in the sense that the arm, it didn't progress into her arms at all. And that was a very strong experience for me, working on someone who was actually in a wheelchair,
I see.
um,
Yeah.
which was very strong. And in the end, actually, I married her daughter,
How wonderful.
which was very nice for me. And although unfortunately my wife passed away
I'm sorry to
in
hear that.
February 24.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, um, that was beginning of 40 years of happiness for me.
Wow.
And
I'm so sorry for your loss. You did mention that you were very fortunate to have brilliant shiatsu teachers.
yes,
And I'm wondering, how did you get to shiatsu, or how did shiatsu find you?
well, it was this guy, Yuichi Kawada, who
Mm-hmm.
was doing classes. He was doing classes up the road
Mm-hmm.
in Belsize Park, and I fancied joining the
Mm-hmm.
classes,
Mm-hmm.
and I found that the shiatsu really got into my tension in a way that nothing else had ever done before, and I felt really kind of elevated. And he was, so I've have a great debt of gratitude towards him
Mm-hmm.
and his father, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I went to San Francisco, and I met Reuho Yamada.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, he was a student of Masunaga Sensei, and he said, "You must check, you must find out about Masunaga Sensei." And I was at the time I was teaching architecture, which I did for 50 years
Wow.
in London, in Westminster University, and in those days, they were kind of universities had a lot of money, and they paid you for sabbaticals,
Mm-hmm.
and I had the chance to go on a sabbatical for a year, which was absolutely brilliant. And Masunaga at that time was starting to teach in English. He was starting to be invited to a lot of conferences,
Mm-hmm.
and he wanted to teach in English, and he wanted to develop his his stuff. And at that time, it was very lucky. And he said, "I tell you what, you teach me English, and I'll teach you Shiatsu." And I thought that was a pretty good deal,
The exchange
really
of two languages.
fantastic, you know. And so I would, spend an hour or two a week when in English conversation with him, and he would teach me shiatsu. I'd go to all his classes and all this kind of stuff, which were very interesting, of course. And I mean, he was slightly, he's a very interesting guy and very, very gifted. I mean, you can't necessarily be like him, I mean, he could read people's energy really incredibly well. And I don't think that I can do that. I've never been able to do that. And I've been doing shiatsu for 50 years, or
I've
beyond.
heard,
Um, and I still can't, diagnosis is still very difficult to achieve.
I see.
But anyway, um, then I had another kind of strong meeting with a Sufi sheikh, um, and that opened the whole thing about the Sufi tradition to me, and I fell in love with him actually, and that was a very strong um, connection as well, and that has continued. And I think that with shiatsu. you can bring some spirituality to your whatever you practice, you can bring to your shiatsu. So I think it's not that specific. I mean, finger pressure, what does shiatsu mean? Finger pressure. What does it
Mhm.
mean? Nothing much, really. You know, I mean, you can bring so much stuff to it. And also music. I also, well, I play the saxophone quite a bit, and
That's impressive.
was very interested in the musical connection, the resonance, musical resonance, you know. And I think that, there are special and unique qualities of shiatsu healing.
Hmm.
Um, there's a kind of touching truth, about shiatsu. It's a very deep thing. It doesn't lie. I think touch doesn't lie in a certain way. And I think you can work from very, very, very deep level to very, very subtle energetic level.
Hmm.
And you can wear many hats. Um, and I suppose that in the end, shiatsu is quite a simple thing. It's
Hmm.
not complicated, but it's not easy. And it's about supporting someone to open their connections. And I think that's a very powerful thing to be able to do. And I think the quality of touch in shiatsu, which is a kind of holding touch, is very, very supportive and opening and helps one open oneself and discover the kind of connections through oneself, um, from inside to outside, and the whole physical, mental, energetic, social, and spiritual connections. Um, and I suppose in the Eastern, from the Eastern point of view, um, start with blocked energy of some kind, you know, and from the Western point of view, it starts with a physical trauma of some kind. That's kind of approach.
Yeah.
But I think that the Eastern and Western approaches combine very well um, in shiatsu, you know, and from then on, somehow, when I got back from Japan, and it was interesting in Japan because I'd also gone to the Philippines and studied with the psychic surgeons in the Philippines who did
Wow.
open operations which were very, very mind-blowing.
How old were you at the
Absolutely.
time?
I was 30,
30.
about 30, yeah.
So in the first half of
29,
your life,
29, 30. Yeah, yeah.
you've had access to such an abundance amount of knowledge.
Yes,
That's
yes.
wonderful.
Very lucky, really. Very lucky. And yes. So what was I saying?
You've mentioned about your travels both to Philippines and to
Oh
Japan.
yeah, the Philippines with the psychic surgeons in the
Yeah.
Philippines and witnessing open operations, which is absolutely mind-blowing, you
Tell
know.
us more.
Yeah, well, I think that the psychic surgeons, some of them are a bit kind of financial, they're tourist type, but some are really, really powerful in the jungles of, in the background of the Philippines, in the jungles. I met a very interesting guy. Trying to remember his name, actually. I can't remember his name, but they were absolutely amazing. And to witness open operations, I mean, he operated on me as well, and they kind of, to witness your own bladder and internal organs, and then they just kind of blow and everything closes up, and it's quite extraordinary. I think they
Wow.
they 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 use a certain kind of jinn power, you know, a genie power,
Hmm.
which is not really for human beings, to be honest with you. I mean, you can't, unless you're born in the Philippines, and they're a very, very strong tradition, Catholic tradition in the Philippines, you can't necessarily do it yourself. I think you have to be born into it somehow. But anyway, it was just, very strong experience. And also, I spent 3 months in Bali, which was very nice as well. although the tropics, is gets to be very heavy.
I see.
It's very humid in the tropics, and and nature kind of eats you alive in the tropics. Everything is kind of alive, and it's a kind of quite heavy going. But anyway, that was yeah. So when I came back, I felt obliged to kind of share um, my knowledge as far as it was, not my ability necessarily, but the knowledge of working with Masunaga for a year, and I got I graduated from him. I got a diploma from him and all this kind of business, you know, and it was fantastic. And to share that with everyone. So we started the kind of Tuesday group, um, and people like Elaine Liechty, um, Carola Beresford Cook, um, Nicola Pooley, I think she was called then, and now she's Nicola Lays, Peter Camp, Bill Palmer, the great and the good of Shiatsu all got together in my little flat in Maida Vale, and from that somehow we decided to start the Shiatsu Society. Because at the time it was a bit dominated by, and I don't mean this in any negative way, but macrobiotic approach.
I see.
And I, whereas I think that the macrobiotic diet can be incredibly powerful if you're ill,
Hmm.
I think that sometimes macrobiotic people were a bit miserable looking and just very kind of but kind of not terribly attractive somehow. And I found that we wanted to have an alternative to for the Shiatsu Society of people who are a little bit more relaxed, if
Hmm.
you might say, about their things like diet. I mean, if you kind of if you went to the kind of the macrobiotic place in London, and you asked for sugar, they would kill you. It's just kind of there's no question about. So it was a little bit too extreme for me, but anyway, then kind of yes. So I mentioned Elaine Liechty, um, Peter Camp, I think Carola Beresford Cook, Nicola Pooley.
I've heard
Um,
about this meeting and about the
yes,
decision of founding the Shiatsu Society. I'm curious what happened behind the scenes. So there was a need for a more flexible community that would not be so strict with some choices, and that's where Shiatsu Society came in. What was the motivation behind it?
I think that the feeling was that one needed some kind of professional ratification,
Hmm. Yeah,
somehow, some
yeah.
kind of official ratification, um, and that that it was an alternative to the macrobiotic approach,
Hmm.
um, and that we were all starting to teach shiatsu
Hmm.
actually, and so it was kind of very it seemed very natural to try and start a society that would support
Hmm.
the teaching and practice of shiatsu. You know.
Hmm.
So I think those were the kind of early days of the society, and it's been going for ever since, hasn't it? Just about
45 years, yes.
45 years. Wow.
Yes, this year
Wow.
will be
Gosh.
45 years, yes.
Gosh. Yes. So and then I was teaching quite a bit as well, and I was quite for a while I was quite big in Italy and Spain, and would travel quite a lot. I've kind of gone off of that a bit, and I think that also I think that travel has become more difficult.
Hmm.
Travel abroad has become more difficult, and so I
Hmm.
think having joined this stupid EU business, or leaving the EU or something, and it's a business to travel,
Yeah.
um, unfortunately. Um, But
Did you
there we
notice
go.
any difference in terms of approaches in other countries? Like you have your background from studying in Japan and then bringing
Yeah.
all that impressive knowledge to the UK and then sharing it in other countries. Did you notice any differences in terms of the communities around the UK, then Italy, then Spain?
I think Italians were quite round.
In what
They,
way?
they eat quite a lot, and they had a lot of pasta. And I think that they were very, very nice. And I very much enjoyed myself in Italy, but I think they were quite big,
I see.
and but flexible.
That's good
And
to know.
Spain as well, I think, although the Spanish diet, in my opinion, is not as good as Italian diet. But I was also teaching a bit in Japan. When I was in Japan, it was amazing actually because I was actually able to work on Ruho's Reuho Yamada. His mum was very old and not very well, and I was doing shiatsu there as well, and occasionally took a couple of his classes for him. That so it was a very, very, very positive experience, really.
What
Um,
made it different from the Western side of the world?
well, Japanese, you can never become Japanese. I mean, basically, you're always a gaijin, you're always a foreigner.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think the Japanese were very interesting. I mean, Masunaga Sensei was I would say he was very funny. They really like to laugh, and they have a laughing club. They had these kind of laughing sessions of laughing shiatsu. Somehow, and I don't know that there's that much difference in the approach of the Italians or the Japanese, really. I mean, I don't know. It's difficult to say, really. I think they're kind of quite. I just remember that quite a lot of the Italians were quite large,
Hmm.
but very flexible. And we used to enjoy lunches. We used to have three-course lunches, in Italy somehow in the middle of the day, and it's kind of a bit difficult to get back to shiatsu after that.
It sounds very difficult. Sounds very different from the microbiotic society that you mentioned in
Very
the
different from the
beginning.
macrobiotic society. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes. And puddings as well, and coffee. And always a macchiato, coffee.
Yeah,
Yeah,
with a bit of milk. I
definitely.
remember that. Wonderful. You've also mentioned that throughout your practice, there've been influences from Sufi practice as well.
Yes.
How did you notice that shifted your approach to shiatsu, if it has in any way?
I think that it's a heart thing.
Okay.
If you have a sheikh, you try to put yourself in connection spiritually with the sheikh.
Hmm.
And I think that he supports, he sends messages and energy and support.
Hmm.
You know. So I think that it's difficult to describe really, but I think that if you have a spiritual practice and it's a very strong spiritual practice because it's daily practice as well, and it's more of a heart connection that you have with the sheikh that
Hmm.
is supportive, I think.
Hmm.
And I think that's the most important thing. So I always felt that, you know, one's being supported by him and by the tradition, actually. There's something called the golden chain of transmission in the
Okay.
Sufi tradition,
Hmm.
which you connect to. And it gives you spiritual support and connection, and sometimes influences you, to understand certain things, gives a different context to life as well, because it's about daily practice.
Hmm.
And so I think it's a different kettle of fish altogether when you have a Sufi practice.
I can imagine. Has it influenced the way you used to give shiatsu?
Um, probably,
Okay.
probably, yes. I think you just have more kind of heart support,
Hmm.
and that is very important. The heart is the most important thing in the Sufi tradition, and I think that you can kind of really give a lot more spiritual support to someone. And basically, if you're talking about them opening on you're trying to help someone open themselves. It gives a strong supportive background to that giving,
Hmm.
basically.
I
And
see
then there's
there's a
also the
lot of
daily
expansion
practice.
in it.
Yeah, the daily practice, of course, which involves all kinds of stuff, praying regularly and fasting in 1 month of the year and this kind of
Hmm.
thing, which is really kind of quite interesting. So it's a kind of overwhelming kind of practice in a way,
Yeah.
strong practice. And yeah,
It sounds like
yeah,
it requires a lot of dedication, and I appreciate to hear the point of view of the openness of the heart. When I think about shiatsu, there's always that opening of the space between the giver and the receiver.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
I was very curious to hear how does your other spiritual practice influence the way that you used to give shiatsu. But you've mentioned the opening of the heart, and it's like you're holding space for everything that is happening there with an open heart and just nurturing the space with
I
those
mean, the
around you.
physical technique is still, the same. I mean, I still follow, and I found that Masunaga's map of meridians is the
Hmm.
most helpful for me to
Hmm.
work on. I know that there are people now who develop, 360 meridians and so many different complications. But for me, it was enough to have the 12,
Hmm.
and to practice in that way. And I think that, yes, yes, can I say really?
No, it makes sense. I'm wondering, since that first meeting where you've decided to start the Shiatsu Society, how did you notice that Shiatsu has evolved throughout the UK? And what are your thoughts about it?
Um, I think that everyone has a different method, and I think that, people have developed very different approaches to shiatsu. Like Bill Palmer, for example, has really developed movement shiatsu, and the development of the embryo and all kinds of stuff like that. And everyone brings a different kind of quality to their work, and depending on their interests, I think. So, you know, I think that some people are dealing with birthing, for example. I think Elise Kubelbeck, or she was then called, Elise Johnson would come sometimes, and she was very interested in embryonic development and stuff like that. You know, and so I think that everyone, Harriet Devlin. Used to come to the Tuesday group, and I think she was very much a Tai Chi person. So she would integrate Tai Chi with everything, and I think that's very important as well. Um, I think Chris Jarmy, bless him, came as well. He died much too young, and I think he came once or twice. Um, but everyone had a different approach, and I think from that the schools kind of developed. Started really. So many schools started, and yeah. So I'm looking at my list of people who were coming then. But yes, I think that Shiatsu, the Shiatsu College started,
Yeah.
which branches in Norfolk as well and everywhere. And I think even yes, Paul Lundberg was another person who started coming at that time, and he was very interesting. he's a very interesting guy and a poet, you know. So I think that everyone brings a different quality to their shiatsu depending on their interests and spiritual quirks,
Practice. How would you
practice.
describe the qualities that you have brought to Shiatsu? You've mentioned a lot of your background and also some of the personal interests, including music.
I think that the most important thing is being earthed. It's actually earthing oneself.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the first connection somehow that is really, really important. You have to be earthed. You have to open to the earth, and then you can start opening to different elemental qualities, like opening to the air, opening to um, water, opening to different elements. So I think that the qualities of touch are very important in association with the elements, elemental qualities. Um, and I think that depending on the person one is working on, they will have very different qualities and very different needs. And if you're open, you can hopefully sense what the person needs that you can really develop and support them.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for mentioning that. I remember at the beginning of the conversation, you've mentioned some of the wonderful moments that you had while giving shiatsu. And I'm
Yes.
wondering whether there have been any challenging moments. And how did you manage to overcome
Well,
them?
there's always some people who are blocked, and it's like working on a brick wall, and they just somehow don't give and they don't open, and it doesn't matter. You can try anything you like, but you can't kind of get beyond a certain point with them. And that's very rare, I'm pleased to say, because I think that shiatsu, I've also had experiences of a lady who wanted to do shiatsu, who was a very that she was told that if she doesn't have an operation the next day to fuse her spine together, she was going to die basically,
Mhm.
and we tried. She wanted to do shiatsu, and so we tried with the shiatsu approach, and she became much much better. So I mean, I think there's all kinds of miraculous happenings in shiatsu when you give that kind of basic support and you can start to feel what someone really needs.
And like you mentioned, I'm assuming it needs a lot of openness and at the same time earthing. So you can be
Yes,
present
I
in the
think that,
moment.
well, I always feel that, you have to be earthed, and you can feel if someone is not earthed,
Hmm.
somehow the touch doesn't get in anywhere.
Hmm.
And I think that the earthing is the primary element somehow to be able to do that. And that's of course that's a life practice of balancing all the elements in one's life, and stuff like that.
I
So,
appreciate you mentioning that. I'm very curious. Whenever you've met the type of people that are not open to, I would say receiving, you can correct me if it's not the right word, but the brick like type of people,
yes,
what, in your opinion, is usually happening behind the scenes? Why isn't there an openness towards this?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have no idea. I have no idea. But I think that there's a point at which you give up on certain people and you say, well, look, if you have to kind of take risks, you have to kind of open yourself up. And if you can't do that, it's going to be very difficult, very, very, very difficult for you. And there's some people that, doesn't work.
Hmm.
Not everything works for everyone.
That's a fair point. I was asking these questions, wondering whether someone who's just coming to Shiatsu, who's becoming a Shiatsu practitioner, may encounter something like this, and they may not necessarily have the professional experience in terms of how to handle it.
Yes, I think that can happen. But I think you can tell very quickly whether someone is just resisting every attempt to be
Hmm.
open. Do
Hmm.
you, do you know what I mean? And I think you just have to take the view yourself of how much you're prepared to spend your time and energy,
Hmm.
and that person's money as well, to some extent, if they're paying you, on something that isn't going to be fruitful, you know.
Yeah.
It's difficult,
Yeah.
difficult to say. Why some people are not open. Maybe, deep traumas from early life. I don't know.
Hmm.
Deep anxiety, deep traumas,
Hmm.
They can't go there. They can't go and allow themselves to be vulnerable.
Hmm. And I
Um,
appreciate that there's a matter of respect towards the autonomy of the other person, which I'm
yes,
hearing from what you're saying as well.
you can't force yourself on them, if you can suggest, you can kind of lead them a little bit and suggest a kind of opening way.
Mhm.
But if you can't achieve that, it's very difficult,
I can
very
appreciate that.
difficult.
What would you tell someone who's just starting their journey as a shiatsu practitioner? What are a few things that you wish you would have known at the beginning of your shiatsu journey?
Um, Enjoy it. Don't be too worried about it. You know, uh, Try and have the best teachers, I would say. You know, I've just been so fortunate somehow in being able to study with someone like Masunaga Sensei, who was very, very gifted. There's no doubt about it, and he was very, very exceptional in his reading of people's energy. It was incredible, really. Um, but I suppose enjoy it, um, and you can't necessarily help everyone. And different conditions. Don't be worried about names of conditions, because if you have a good technique, um, you can find something. You can usually find some way of helping someone.
I hear that it's a matter of coming back to the simplicity of the practice
Yes,
instead of just looking for complicated terms or finding pathologies or different names for something, just coming
yes,
back
I
to
think
the
so.
essence
I
of
think so.
shiatsu.
I don't think it's a complicated thing, but it's not easy because you have to actually connect and you have to somehow connect with energy. And
And I'm assuming it requires to be open as well, because you've mentioned it earlier.
I guess so. And I suppose that opening is something that is a gift in the first place, I suppose. But I think the martial arts were also very helpful. That was another thing that I was doing for quite a while. I did quite a lot of martial arts. Um, um,
In what way was it helpful?
in what way was it helpful? As a physical discipline
Hmm.
of training, you have to get yourself together. You have to actually be able to kind of carry difficulties, and you have
Hmm.
to be able to kind of deal with stress. And I think that martial arts train you in in those aspects. You
Hmm.
know that there's a certain amount of fear sometimes in a martial art, and there's a certain amount of discipline, and that discipline makes you obviously physically flexible
Hmm.
and supported. So I think that's really helpful as well. Music
Thank
and
you.
martial arts, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that as well. I'm going to take a small pause just to ask anyone if you have any questions. We
Mm.
haven't reached the end of our conversation yet, but I'm just a little bit conscious of your time, Michael. So, in case anyone has any questions, I'm inviting you to prepare them while I ask one of the final questions towards Michael, and then I'll invite you to open your microphones. Michael, obviously, you've been a massive part of a 45 years journey in developing and expanding shiatsu in the UK and worldwide. And
50 years,
50
50
years,
years,
50
yeah,
years in your
50 years.
personal life,
Man and
45
boy,
in the Shiatsu
man and boy,
Society.
yeah, yeah.
Um, what are your hopes, if you still have any, for shiatsu in the UK and beyond? Where would you like shiatsu to go?
Gosh, that's a very difficult question. Um, I think it's absolutely fine, shiatsu. I just think it needs to be known and more understood, maybe, and more widely recognized. I still think there is a kind of ignorance about shiatsu and what it is and
Hmm.
how it works, and it's based on, and that it's based on the kind of Chinese medicine approach
Hmm.
rather than Western medicine approach, which is much more holistic,
Hmm.
in its approach. So I think that it's to be more known, I think
Hmm.
would be my hope for shiatsu. And that I hope that I can continue to do it for another few years. As one's physical flexibility definitely goes down a little bit,
I can
um,
appreciate that.
sadly. Um, it's would be nice to kind of feel that one can make up for it with one's experience and basically experience, yes, of doing it for so many years, that you hope that you can kind of find a way through.
Such a wonderful career, and I'm truly inspired by everything that you shared with us. I am not a shiatsu practitioner myself, but I've been studying shiatsu and I've been receiving shiatsu. And hearing about your journey and the journey of all the other guests that we've interviewed, including some of the founders that you've mentioned as well,
Yeah.
I find myself very fortunate to be part of this conversation. So I really appreciate your time, your energy, your resources, and all the wisdom that you shared with us. Um, if
You're
anyone
very
has any
welcome.
questions
You're
before
very
we,
welcome.
thank you. Before we close the conversation, please, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask the questions or share your thoughts, keeping in mind that you'll be on the camera. So if you don't want that, please just turn the camera off, okay? I'm going to give it a few moments.
Great. No questions.
Perfect. Michael, is there anything else that you wanted to share with us and I haven't had the chance to ask you just yet?
No doubt that I will think, why didn't I say that? And why didn't I mention that? And why didn't I mention that? But, no, I think that I've covered the basics.
Thank you.
Thank you
It's
very
been an
much
absolute
indeed.
pleasure.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for joining.